Shlach is one of my favorite parshas. Why do I like it? Exploring new territory. And that idea of like going out to the unknown, something we're not familiar with, seeing what it is, it's always exciting. That said, there's a risk. As we see in this week's portion, it didn't work out super well. But one of the reasons it didn't work out well, as the Rebbe explains here, is precisely because the people weren't excited about the unknown. They were kind of happy with where they are. But that's a little bit difficult to understand. They were in the desert. They were going to a land which God tells them a land full of milk and honey. All good things. Why would you like to stay in the desert? Oh, okay, so in the desert they had it all good. They had clouds of glory, they had manna. But it wasn't real life. So the back and forth of this, that's what the Rebbe discusses here in the sichah. I think it's just a very valuable lesson for each one of us. Okay, in Parsha Shlach, Torah relates that the spies Moshe sent to Eretz Yisrael caused the Jews to fear enter the land. They reported the inhabitants of the land are, I'm on page 5. Don't read it. The inhabitants of the lands are mighty. So when they heard that, the Jews became frightened, afraid they might be able to wage war against his people and conquer Israel. The spies further contended, not able to go up against them. They're stronger than we are. Now, the Hebrew thought they are stronger than we are. Hazak only menu. Sages interpret as meaning they are stronger than he. Imenu can also means we are. It also means that he is. Who's the he? Hashem. They're saying these nations are stronger than God. And they paraphrase it saying it is if the homeowner cannot remove his articles from there. As Hashem had put these nations there, he's the homeowner, it's his house. Can't, and they're just stronger than he is. That's a little hard. Now, all the stories in the Torah serve as lessons for the divine service of the Jewish people in every generation. What lesson can we learn from the account of the spies' disastrous mission? What's the lesson here? True. Knowing the story is necessary because we must rectify the weeping for generations that result in the spies' report and claim. When did the spies come back? Tisha B'Av night. And so it says that the Jews wept that night, and because they wept that night unnecessarily, God said this is going to be a night of weeping for all generations. And any time where the Jews' sins would cause problems, things would happen on Tisha B'Av. Right? God doesn't bring bad stuff unnecessarily. But if there's a reason for it to happen, it gets pushed off until certain bad days. Tisha B'Av is one of them. So we have to know that what are we doing on Tisha B'Av? We're basically have to correct all the faults of that day, including the very source of it, that we must rectify the weak generations have the spies report and claims. But even so, is it necessary to know all the details of the story? I mean, yeah. Okay, so if you want to get to this idea of what happened, so we can rectify what happened in Tisha B'Av, so we'll go into it and understand, we'll hear the story. But all the details? Why? Also, clarification necessary regarding the core issue. How would these arguments with the spies able to frighten the Jews and dissuade them from wanting to enter Israel to the extent that they were unable to go up? Throughout the journey, the events leading to the Exodus and the journey from Egypt, the Jews had seen that God had been and was. At that very moment, they ate manna that morning. So God was leading through the desert, working overt miracles that transcend nature of his. And over that, so confident that he could continue to do so. And what was happening? And think about it for a second. The Rebbe is going to go further about it, into it. This is the first year after the exile, after the Exodus. So they just gotten out of Egypt. Sea split. Even before that, there were 10 plagues. And then they got out and the sea split and drowned all the Egyptians. And then they had manna, food from heaven, a well which traveled with them throughout the whole time. Clouds of glory which kept them totally air conditioned. The clouds of glory killed all the snakes and scorpions. Hey, they see God's working miracles for them. What are they scared of? What were they frightened? I mean, why? The Rebbe explains that. For example, deserts through which the Jews passed would have by snakes, serpents, and scorpions. Elsewhere, our sages explain that even though these creatures were fearsome of monstrous size, they were slain by the Ark of Covenant and the clouds of glory. The Jews witnessed this wondrous supernatural miracle on an ongoing basis. Moreover, just as God worked miracles to protect the Jews from harm, so too did he work miracles by them with goodness. Day after day, the Jews ate manna, bread from heaven, and drank water from Miriam's well. On a continuous basis, all of these involve many manifest miracles that transcend nature, as the Medrash explains. In other words, they were seeing day after day miracles from heaven. And just as the Jews benefited from miracles, God killed wild in the desert, similarly God brought about supernatural. I'm on page 6. Similarly, God brought about supernatural victories on the behalf of the battles against other nations. When they attacked by Egyptians, God himself waged war on their behalf, splitting the sea for them. So great a miracle was this that our sages describe as being difficult. They had witnessed all the miracles with their own eyes. They did not have to rely on faith. Why then did they accept the spies' argument? Why didn't they conclude that just as God had worked miracles on their behalf in the war of the Egyptians, he'd also work miracles on their behalf when battling the Canaanites? And furthermore, there's another question here. What is even more puzzling is that even when Caleb challenged the spies to respond to their claims, he did not refer to the miracles of the Exodus or those that transpired in the desert. He said, merely encourage the Jews, let us send and take possession of the land. In other words, when the spies came back, they said we can't do it. The people got all scared. So, and Caleb, one of him and Joshua, these were the two guys who remained faithful. They said, we can. But that's all they said. But if it said that, it would have seemed logical. The first thing he would have said was, hey, why are you afraid of them? Look at what God has done for us. And he doesn't mention that. In other words, the Rebbe's question here is, this fear the Jews had has totally no place in logic. God is continually working miracles for them. So what are they afraid of? What are they afraid of? Can I read the next little bit?
Where are we at on this page?
Yeah.
That's number 2? Or
Yeah, number 2.
The Jews' fear of the Canaanites cannot be explained by saying that the victory over Pharaoh was not enough to inspire confidence regarding the battle against the 31 kings of Canaan, who were strong and mighty. After all, as stated in the song that the Jews sang, after the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, all the inhabitants of Canaan melted in fear when they heard of the miracle. Moreover, their fear was so powerful that it still affected the Canaanites 40 years later. When Yehoshua sent spies to Jericho, the inhabitants told them that the terror of you has fallen upon us, for we heard how God dried up the water of the Sea of Reeds. The miracle of the splitting of the sea shook their hearts with dread. Certainly, when Moshe sent spies to Canaan, which was much closer in time to the Exodus and the splitting of the sea, the Jews should have been confident they would defeat the 31 kings.
The Canaanites themselves were scared stiff of the Jews. We're in dread. Our hearts have melted. That was 40 years later. And the Jews themselves didn't have confidence. Does that make sense? Again, as I wrote in the photo here, it's a classic statement. It took God one moment to take the Jews out of Egypt, for 40 years to take Egypt out of the Jews. That a set of mindset stays with you. But, even so, it's questionable. I mean, yeah, you have that mindset. You have quote a slave mentality. But you're seeing things. You're seeing miracles. What's the moreover?
Moreover, the Talmud relates that whenever the Jews are subjugated by a given nation, God makes that nation stronger than all other nations, granting them dominion over all others as well. Thus, when the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, the Egyptians ruled the entire world. The 31 kings of Canaan, like all nations of the world at that time, were their vassals. Thus, it is understood that after the victory over the Egyptians, the Jews should have had nothing to fear from the kings of Canaan.
Okay. So now we got the question. What's the answer? And again, since it doesn't make sense at all, the answer can't just be something straightforward. It's got to be something kind of deep. Take the next one.
Where the spies went wrong. Chassidus explains that the deeper reason the spies wanted to remain in the desert rather than enter Eretz Yisrael is that they did not want to descend into a setting where they would have to involve themselves with material matters. While in the desert, the Jews are removed from all worldly concerns. They received their physical sustenance in a way that transcended ordinary material existence. They ate manna, bread from heaven, and received water from Miriam's well. Even their clothes grew with them. It was particularly noteworthy because, in contrast to food and drink that become assimilated into a person's flesh and blood, garments are external and do not become part of a person's body. Even so, the Jews' garments grew with their bodies. As our sages comment in the verse, your clothes did not wear out.
So, how many guys have ever been in yeshiva? So, in yeshiva, it's just beautiful. You sit there learning, you get this food, somebody's taking care of you. Now, as soon as you leave yeshiva, you got to go work. You got to pay rent, pay for this, pay for that. Nobody's taking care of you anymore. That's the issue. They're in the desert. They're in yeshiva. Literally, what do they do there for 40 years? They sat and learned Torah. And what happened?
What's the point about the clothes?
The clothes is say like this: that they got bread, they got manna and water. Okay, but manna and water come from part of you. So it's natural that they feed you, send you. The clothes grew with them. Little kids had clothes when they were 5 years old, and those clothes lasted them for 40 years. So that's external. That's a big miracle. And I saw that. Now that's the point. Read the next paragraph.
The Jews knew that when they entered Eretz Yisrael, the manna would cease to descend. Instead, they would have to derive their sustenance from the bread from the earth. To receive that bread, they would have to involve themselves with matters of this world. They would need to work, plowing, sowing, etc. Similar, they would not receive water from Miriam's well, and the other miraculous elements of their previous existence would also end. For this reason, the spies did not desire to enter Eretz Yisrael, complaining that it's a land that consumes.
This is it. Yeshiva was beautiful. Really, no, really, like it's a certain never land. So the spies, they were in the desert, had everything done for them. Why wouldn't they want to stay there? Now, it's just, everything's so pretty here. Oh, they have to go work? I don't want to work. That's, in other words, it wasn't just laziness. I mean, I'm kind of portraying it that way as laziness. It was more, what were they doing in the desert? They were learning Torah. They learned Torah from Moshe Rabbeinu and 70 the elders. Can you imagine having a Rebbe teaching you personally? Or having the Rebbe's prize students teaching you personally? That's what was happening. No need to worry about anything. Spiritual life from the greatest minds of the time. So why wouldn't you be totally enthralled by that idea to the point where, wow, I want to stay here forever. I mean, one of the hardest things, as I used to do this when I was my note as a mashkiach for several years. The hardest thing was to teach guys, you got to get out of here. This place is only temporary. Because it's a very big tendency that, oh, wow, let me just stay here. It's just lovely. Because not only because you're lazy, chas v'sholom, to put it that way, because you're involved with something really deep and meaningful. Your life is changing in a deep, inner, personal, spiritual way. When you go out to work, I mean, yes, the process is continuing. Know God in all your ways. But it isn't as easy. On the contrary, that focus on the time where I can just sit and learn, it's a wow. So that's what the spies were saying. And that's what the people were listening to them for. Hey, we've got a whole different dimension of being here. We're living on a higher plane. And now you want us to go into Eretz Yisrael. What's Eretz Yisrael? Continue.
A land that consumes its inhabitants. The phrase is aptly chosen. When food is consumed, it becomes absorbed and assimilated into the body of the person who ate it, becoming part of his flesh and blood. So too the spies complained, Eretz Yisrael consumes its inhabitants, coarsening them and making them earthly.
It consumes its inhabitants, just like food becomes part of your body. The people would become earthly. They'd be involved in the land. Say, well, I'm going to have to work 24/7.
This would entail a drastic departure from their life in the desert. They would lack the spiritual elements that are accessible when one is removed from the world and involved only with the spiritual. Indeed, in the desert, their physical bodies were nurtured and derive vitality from bread of heaven, which refined their nature, making them fit to study Torah, as reflected in our sage's statement, the potential to expound upon the Torah was given solely to those who partook of the manna.
So, again, this is a big thing in Lubavitch mentality, different than to a certain extent in the traditional Torah world. The traditional Torah world will tell you, stay in Kolo forever. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar. Kolo is a place where adult men sit and study. They're paid a certain stipend. Their wives work. And they sit there, the Hebrew expression is al Torah v'avoda, giving their lives to Torah and divine service. And on one hand, that's kind of beautiful. It's very beautiful. On the other hand, you don't want to do it. Hey, that's your problem. I mean, if you don't, the person who doesn't want to do that if you really ever sense what it is to learn a Gemara thoroughly, and then go deeper, and then go deeper, and even then go deeper, and see the whole thing over from this generation. This is the rabbis did it in this century, and then further later in the tradition that they went from that side, and this guy went. It gets so involved and so interesting. It's really an amazing thing, and that people can sit months on one page. When I came home from yeshiva the first time, my mother says, I mean, what's the structure of your day in yeshiva? So we learn Talmud for most of the day, six hours a day. So how much Talmud do you learn? And I'm like, this is my mother. My mother's, we're achievement-oriented families. We learn 2 pages a week. Most Bachrim never learn 2 pages a week. But I actually did. I also learned them pretty well, but it's learned 2 pages. She says, "You're a smart boy. You can do more than 2 pages a week." And she's so right. But the point is that the people who really learn Torah, 2 pages a week is a lot, because you're not learning just 2 pages, you're learning 200 pages and more sometimes. Because back and forth, you try, and you're really understanding the logic, motivating it. So that's what they were doing in the desert. Garden work? I'm not gonna be able to have that focus. Why would I want to do that? And it's not again. When I'm saying it often that there's a certain laziness that's implied there. But I'm not meaning to do that. It's really the choice between the physical and the spiritual. They were saying, hey, we can taste. We're now here in spirituality. We're going to have to deal with the world. So what was wrong? Again, and to a certain extent, when the traditional Torah world, quote unquote, who pushes kollel, really fights against, really like they're saying, hey, the guys they're really right. Stay in kollel. And that's what the spies were basically telling the Jews to do. Stay in kollel. So what do we say in truth?
In truth, however, the spies made a serious mistake. The entire purpose of existence is to make the dwelling for God in his lowest world. This requires involvement in the material dimensions of existence, making them channels for godliness. This was the spies' error. The entire purpose of the Jews' journey through the desert was merely to serve as a preparatory stage for their life in Eretz Yisrael. They would fashion a dwelling for God in this lowly realm.
Classic story. A businessman, pretty successful, gave a lot of money to charity. And then it happens to most of us at one time or another. Things turn south for a while. So things turned south for him. And he came to the Rebbe with a complaint. He says, listen, personally, I'm prepared to give it all up. I don't need you money. But I already made various commitments to charity. I promised to build this shul to support, to help not marry off these kids, to support the Torah studies of this child, not my own even, others. And I made these commitments. This is what I need for these and these purposes. The Alter Rebbe looked at him and said, don't say what you need, say what you're needed for. And he fainted. Because he understood the reality of that. What are you needed for? And the message here is the spies were looking at, oh, how nice it is. What am I getting out of it spiritually? And Hashem is saying, wait a minute, you're not here, not in this world for your own sake. Why you were born for a purpose. God put you here for his purpose, to make this world a dwelling for him. Oh yeah, he gave you 4 years in the desert where you had everything. Then you could study Torah. Yes, he gave you that so you could understand his purpose. You could understand his deeper plan. But now you got to put it into practice. Make it happen. Put it into action. Get it done. So the purpose was not, in other words, yes, the desert is necessary. Yeshiva is necessary. Kollel is even necessary for some people. But only because later you're going to Israel. Later you're going to actually work. Later you're going to make the world itself a dwelling for God in the lower realms. In other words, this preparatory time in the desert where you're being fed and nurtured by God's hand, given the chance for spiritual development, is only so that later when you go out into the world, you can use that spiritual development to work within the context of reality to make it all real. Next one.
Sure. From miracles to nature. Based on the above, we can explain why, despite all the overt miracles witnessed before and after the Exodus, at the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, and throughout their journeys in the desert, the spies still doubted God's power with regard to the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, claiming, quote, the inhabitants of the land are stronger than he. Quote. They did not draw a lesson from these miracles, for they saw that the miraculous and the mundane as two unrelated planes. They maintained that the miracles and victories that transcended nature, which they had experienced in the desert, where they were removed from material matters, could not serve as proof regarding the pattern that their lives would follow my bad, in Eretz Yisrael. There, the pattern of their lives would require divine service appropriate for a settled land, i.e., integrated within a stable framework of ordinary life. In the desert, they were involved with spiritual matters, and therefore, miracles that transcended nature were an ongoing aspect of their lives. However, when they would have to begin life in a settled land, everything would follow the pattern of the natural order. Indeed, in certain matters, this transition actually began immediately upon their entry into Eretz Yisrael. The manna, Miriam's well, the clouds of glory, and the like all ceased before they entered the land.
So it's the fear is actually, not so unnatural. You say, oh, in the desert, God works best miracles. Because the desert is all miraculous. Wait a second. He says we're going to have to work. We have to deal with nature. Wait a second. Deal with nature. 31 kings. Oh, that's a different story. When it's the desert, it's miracles. Okay, we understand. But now, 31 kings, that's a little bit of a different story. Maybe, and that's, continue it. If the natural order would prevail.
If the natural order would prevail, they argued, it would be impossible to conquer the descendants of the giants who inhabited Eretz Yisrael, for, according to the natural order, they were stronger than the Jews. On this basis, we can understand our sage's restatement of the spies' claim. It is as if the homeowner cannot remove his articles from there. The spies definitely knew, indeed, they had seen with their own eyes, that God is the owner of the entire world and can do with it as he wishes. Moreover, they realized that every entity in the world is one of God's articles. They argued that to remove his articles means to take the sparks of godliness enclosed in, and which provide the life force for, the physical substance of the land of Canaan, and to elevate them to holiness. This, the spies felt, is only possible if one conducts one's life in a spiritual manner, living above worldliness. In the desert, such conduct was feasible, but not in the material world, since it is God's will for the world to remain unchanged and be governed by all the laws of nature, and yet still become a channel for godliness. They thought that God had decided to sacrifice his ownership, as if that could be, and accept the dictates of the natural order. They did not understand. How could it be possible for the world to follow the owner's, i.e. God's, will and be controlled by the laws of nature, and yet be a place for miracles, the opposite of nature?
But what's the issue? They say, wait a second. Nature is nature. Nature, you work 6 days a week? No, you work 7 days a week. Nature, you got to conform to the natural pattern. Do what people at large do. Oh, if you're in the desert, when everything's godly, that's fine. In the natural world, the two don't mix. In other words, and God wants us to live in the natural world. So how can we go there? He says the natural work pattern should continue. But the natural pattern is against Torah. It doesn't allow you to Torah. I mean, how easy it is to keep Shabbos. How easy is it? So they're saying, hey, the task is impossible. We can't be in nature, accepting nature, and yet keeping God and doing what God wants. Yeah, in the desert we can.
Why would they feel like this if inherently Mitzrayim was the physical world where they had to work, they were enslaved. It's the most physical as it gets, but also they saw all the nisim, all the miracles of that Hashem did to free us from slavery.
Right, so they felt that was all one pattern. That you're right. Egypt was Egypt, and now he wants us to go. Okay, so we're not going to be enslaved, but we're going back to that same pattern where nature rules.
Right,
all
but
the
that should have proven that it's not black and white.
Well,
They were thinking
no, they were
that
thinking
way.
that it is black and white.
Right,
That this is exact. Yeah,
Correct.
there was a
I'm saying
period.
why?
There was a
Because in
period where
Mitzrayim
it was
wasn't
white.
black and white.
There was a period where it was white, only white.
Right.
But now, when it's black and white, when there is a natural world, and the natural world seemingly is in control, he said, no more manna, no more well. You got to fight with actual armor. Fight 31 kings or the giants. I don't want to do that. I mean, it's scary. That's exactly what he's saying. If you're going according to natural order, it's scary. Yeah. So take us a little further.
This argument was rebutted by Kalev and Yeshua with their statement, if God desires us, he will give us the land. They were saying that since God's inner desire is for the Jewish people to carry out that purpose and create a dwelling for him in Eretz Yisrael, they should realize that the Canaanite nations are our bread, for God is with us. Do not fear them. There is no need to become intimidated and fear confrontation with the world. Although the natural order will remain, God will always accompany the Jewish people and grant them supernatural success.
I mean, your issue was, like I said, they saw things as black and white. They didn't realize that within nature, who made nature? He did. That didn't comprehend. They could see spiritual and they could see physical. They couldn't see the idea of harmoniously blending the spiritual with the physical. They couldn't understand. They could understand God doing miracles or God leaving nature as it is. They couldn't understand how in nature God can give you success that transcends nature. And they didn't understand what it really meant to be a Jew. The whole point of a Jew's life is precisely that, to live in nature and yet to be above nature, to be in the world and above the world at the same time. They couldn't comprehend that. Finish this up there.
Thus the world will become our bread, i.e., it will become assimilated in our bodies and thus subsumed within our being. After the entry into Eretz Yisrael, as in the desert, God will dwell among us, within every Jew, and enable us to make our portion of the world a resting place for godliness.
God is with us. Every Jew is his, quote, shliach, his emissary, charged with God with a purpose. God says, I want to make this world holy. I want to make this world a dwelling place for me. But I'm not going to do it myself. You're going to do it. It's our responsibility. So he's given us that spiritual power. He's given us a godly soul in Torah and mitzvos, and he's given us, okay, now work. Take that godly power that I've given you. You'll see. As you apply it, it's going to work. But you got to apply it. And they said, wait, we don't understand this. This is a challenge. The physical, spiritual, they didn't comprehend, despite sitting in Kolel for that year. It was only a year. You didn't quite catch the whole purpose here. That they were supposed to be in the world, at the same time be above the world, and that God gives you the potential to do that. I'm going to take the next little bit. When infinity is also a limit.
When infinity is also a limit. In truth, miracles enclosed in the natural order are loftier than overt miracles that transcend nature. Miracles that transcend the natural order bear witness that God is not bound by the limitations of nature and that he can disrupt them. The miracles enclosed within the natural order demonstrate that not only is God not bound by nature, but that he is also not bound by the limitations of the ordinary conception of infinity, i.e., he need not manifest himself in a manner that reflects his infinity and be bound by its definition. Instead, because he is above both nature and infinity, he can fuse the two and enable them to function in harmony.
Let's see what we just said. It was people, normal conception of things as a material world and a spiritual reality. And yeah, the spirituality is stronger than the material world. God can work miracles. That's working miracles. They're separate. Material reality. Miracles, yeah, he's the ball boss. He can do things. No, that's like finiteness and infinity. So no, God surpasses infinity. He's not only, it's not only that he has infinity, he can take infinity and fuse it with finiteness. Okay,
the primary and archetypal revelation of God's fusion of opposites was manifest in the Holy of Holies. There, space, one of the fundamental dimensions of our material existence, and the transcendence of space were fused. To explain, the Torah prescribed precise measurements for the Ark of the Covenant, 2.5 cubits in length and 1.5 cubits in width. Now, there were 10 cubits from the eastern wall of the Holy of Holies to the eastern side of the Ark, and 10 cubits from the western wall to the western side of the Ark. Yet the width of the entire chamber was only 20 cubits.
Did you get that?
Shouldn't have fit.
It was 20. The whole thing was 20. 10 here, 2.5. Where did 2.5 go to? Finiteness and infinity were together.
But if it wasn't 2.5, it wouldn't have worked. It had to be 2.5.
What?
But it had to be 2.5.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the next line. In a place.
In a place where precise measurements was significant, the Ark did not take up any space.
Like I said, it had to be exactly 2.5. It was slightly more, slightly less, but so it had to be the exact measure.
Its width or length.
And yet its width or length, and it had to be measured.
Limitations and transcendence were fused as one. For the
That's the same thing of nature and the supernatural coming together, which is a Jewish purpose.
For the Jewish people to bring about such a change within the material world, it was necessary for them to enter Eretz Yisrael. In the desert, they lived above nature. In Eretz Yisrael, by contrast, they would bring about the fusion of nature and transcendence. For this reason, their initial entry into Eretz Yisrael was made possible by the Ark. They carried it before them into the Jordan River, and the river split. This miracle defined their mission in Eretz Yisrael because the Ark and the settlement and transformation of Eretz Yisrael share the same theme, the fusion of limitation and transcendence.
So in the desert, they're just miracles, infinity. Your life stopped for a while, and you were just above it, above the world. But that's not the purpose. Why did God bring us down here? We said before, to make this world a dwelling for him, to fuse finiteness and infinity. A dwelling for him means it's a dwelling from in the lower worlds. So we're in the lower worlds, in a place where nature rules, and it's a dwelling for him that God wants to be revealed.
But then the River Jordan did split, and the walls of Jericho did come falling down, right? There were still like.
Yeah, look, there were miracles, but those were the beginning ones. Like it says Jericho was the lock, the manual of Eretz Yisrael. So you break the lock, but afterwards it goes on. It went to natural, and that's what said also. It all did to the Ark. Why? Because the Ark was this idea of fusion, finiteness, and infinity. Yeah, and exactly like you just said. The Ark did it. It was a miracle. It started miraculously. It started with this idea of above nature. But you go because he's showing. Wow. Share for a while. You'll enjoy it. they're able to bring the natural, the supernatural into nature. That's the key. You want to read the next little bit? Here?
Inheriting what's infinite. The concepts explained above also enable us to understand Kale's choice of words in his response to the spies. Let us ascend and take possession of it. In Hebrew, the words let us ascend are repeated, alo na'ale. The implication is that two types of ascent are involved, not merely two ascents of the same type. For the second ascent to be of the same type and comparable to the first, it would have been considered part of that first ascent. It would not be considered an ascent in its own right.
In other words, it says like this: the angels are continually ascending. And yet, Prophet Zechariah, he's given the prophecy, I'll let you be one who progresses among these who stand. Wait a second. They're constantly rising higher. Why are they being called one who stands? Because their ascents are all relative. Going a little bit higher, every day a little bit higher. What he's saying here is no. Aleh na'aleh, a twofold ascent. You're going to have an ascent of a nature where your first ascent won't look like an ascent at all. This is going to be a totally different realm. Why? Because what was the first ascent? Going to the desert, jumping above nature. Beautiful. But that really, not such a great ascent. Because after all, God is natural, this natural, is infusion. We said before, the split of the Red Sea was called kosher. Why was it kosher? What was it difficult? Because at the moment of transcendence, the water remained water. It was standing and water. Like, in other words, when the river turned to blood, it was blood. So, yes, the river turned to blood, miracle, but just a miracle. Frogs, God brought frogs. I got a lot of frogs. Here, he split the sea, but the water was still flowing. It was just flowing up. It was flowing up and down. Instead of going straight, it was flowing up and down. The fish were swimming in the water up. In other words, it was still water. It needed the east wind to continually keep it going. In other words, because two things were happening at the same time. And that's the second ascent. Not only transcendence above nature, but that in nature itself, in the world, we can live a godly manner. That's a wow. I mean, to live spiritually outside the world, to sit in a mountain on the Himalayas, yeah, beautiful, lovely. But that's tasting the spiritual as the spiritual. To see the spiritual in the material. As we said before, B'chol torchecha de'ehu, know God in all your ways. That when you play your flute, you sense this isn't just a nice instrument. These are godly tunes coming out. That's a wow.
When Doug plays.
Yeah, he plays great. You'll see. But yeah, you'll see, in other words, this isn't just a natural thing happening. This is God working through us. That was the key to, and that's the key to entering to show that, and that's what the spies didn't understand. They didn't understand to bring the two together, that nature and the miraculous can be one. Take it further.
This is also implied by the Hebrew term kalud, used in Vayarashnu Osa, meaning, and we will take possession of it. This term relates to the word Yerusha, meaning inheritance. An inheritance is not considered a transfer of ownership in the ordinary sense. Instead, the heirs assumes the position of the deceased. When an article is purchased or given as a present, it is transferred from the domain of the previous owner to that of the buyer or the recipient. Nevertheless, the buyer or recipient does not assume the same position as the previous owner, i.e., he is not considered identical with, essentially the same as the previous owner. By contrast, when an article is inherited, the heir assumes the status of the person from whom he inherits, where the essence of the deceased and that of the heir are identical.
Let's just say this is an idea in ignorance. You see the spiritual concepts about it. When you buy something from somebody, you focus on the article. Buy this can of soda, you get something, you transfer one to another. What happens when you inherit something?
You pay taxes.
Hopefully not, you get a good accountant. But inheritance, and actually this is, if you do, if you have a structured will correctly, you don't pay, it's not like, oh, this came from him and became mine. The estate continues. The property belongs to the estate. You just assume ownership of the estate because you and the heir share the same essence. You and the deceased share the same essence. It doesn't go from one person to another. It's his. Just, I'm now him. The parents become given over to the kids, their essence, and therefore also their property. The property, in which the property is something additional, I assumed my father's position, and therefore everything my father owns becomes mine. That's the key here. It's not when you buy something or you give it a gift, the gift transfers. Here, the essence transfers, and the essence therefore takes everything with it. Now, what does it have? That's what we said, the irrational talk. We're going to make our inheritance. This is going to become eternally ours. Why? Because who does it really belong to begin with? Exactly, it's all his. And he's given that over to us. And therefore, we're not buying this land, we're not conquering this land, we're inheriting it. We're making it our eternal inheritance because this is fundamentally ours. Take a little further.
This was Caleb's intent when he said, "We will take possession of it." By entering Eretz Yisrael, they settled the land, and through involvement with material entities while making them channels of godliness, the Jews would take possession of the world as an inheritance. Through such efforts, they would bond with God's essence.
Okay. You want to take the next little bit? Spies in the 21st
Spies
century.
in the 21st century. The lesson from the story of the spies regarding our divine service can be metaphorically explained as follows. There exist two general stages in the personal life of every Jew: his journeys through the desert and his settling of Eretz Israel. Similarly, these two stages are reflected in our lives on a daily basis. We begin the day occupied with prayer and follow with a regular session of Torah study and the like, without having to deal with material matters. True, the tzitzis and the tefillin, which we wear, are physical entities, but as is evident, putting them on each day does not involve the strains and limitations of worldly existence. However, after prayer and study, we must involve ourselves with matters of the world, with our businesses and personal affairs, carrying out our divine service according to the directive, know him in all your ways.
Because this is the desert in Eretz Yisrael we do every day. First we pray and study, or pray and study, depending on how you work your day. Then you go out to work. The desert, the spiritual time, and then Eretz Yisrael, living with nature.
A person can claim that during the study of the Torah, while studying God's will and wisdom, it is possible to feel that nothing exists other than God and Him. How much more so during prayer, when one stands before God with complete bittul and even one's eye is eclipsed. Is it possible to fear that all that exists is God? But what happens afterwards when one is involved in his personal affairs and in worldly matters? The very word for world, olam, relates to the word ke'elam, meaning concealment, i.e., the world is a place where godliness is hidden. Moreover, the Torah itself mandates that one work in the world in a manner that recognizes its ordinary patterns and structures. How then can a person bring himself to the point that, even while involved in these matters, they will not occupy space in his mind, nor will he derive enjoyment from them, but instead use them solely for the sake of his divine service?
Now, when you're in the desert, in prayer and study, yeah, no problem. No eye, it's all hidden. But now when you're going into the world, and you have to work, and you have to deal with the everyday realities, how can I say, well, it's all him? On the contrary. He's telling me to be involved in it. How can I say it? How can the worldliness, on the contrary?
On the contrary, he will claim, justifiably according to his perception, that since he is involved in material concerns throughout the greater portion of the day, not only can he not carry out his divine service as desired throughout the entire day, but it is natural for his involvement with material entities to cloud his awareness and disturb him even during his times of study and prayer. He will claim that the land, i.e., the material consciousness it engenders, consumes its inhabitants, absorbing him to the extent that while he is studying or praying, he has thoughts that stem from his involvement in the world throughout the day that distract him during these spiritual activities. This was the argument of the spies. They maintained that if a person involves himself in the world according to its patterns and structures, he will encounter an insurmountable challenge. Even the homeowner cannot remove his article from there, as it were.
Let's say, look, hey, I'm going to go out in the world, deal with the world as the world. I'm not going to make it. I can't live spiritually and live at the same time. And there's a certain justification for that. I mean, try it. Show me a person who can really live spiritually in the material. It's very, very difficult. No, anybody who says no has never done it. I mean, really. So but that's the issue here. So, however, the truth is
that the observance of Torah and its mitzvos must be carried out within the natural order. Nevertheless, despite the existence of the limitations of the natural order, if God desires us, i.e., if we involve ourselves in worldly matters merely as agents of God, with the intent of fulfilling His desire, we can unite nature and that which is above nature.
That's the key. Now, if you try to do it on your own, you're not going to make it. If you see it yourself as, why am I here in the first place? What am I doing? And whatever my material pursuit is, I'm acting as an agent of Hashem, then you can do it. Because your eyes, you took your eye out of it. As long as you're working with your eye, you work with your own mind, your own natural thing, then it's a self-defeating prophecy. But when you see, if God desires us, if I'm tuned in on what is Hashem's desire, and what is His desire for dwelling in this lower world, you're going to win. Where do you get the potential for this? This is a beautiful point here.
Transforming the world into a dwelling fit for Him. Earlier, it was explained that this potential is granted by the ark. Although the ark is not visible in the present age, it remains intact, having merely been sequestered in a hidden place under the Beit HaMikdash. Thus, the fusion of nature and the transcendence that it makes possible is a potential we can always access.
This is a beautiful idea. He said, what made possible transcendence of nature and the fusion of nature and transcendence? The ark. That was a place where, like I said, in the base of Mikdash, ark didn't take up any space. The miraculous and natural space, infinity and finiteness came together. Was the ark destroyed? No. Shlomo Melech had a place built under the base of Mikdash. And because he knew that ultimately the Jews would sin, the base of Mikdash would be destroyed. And Yoshayahu, the last of the Jews' righteous kings, the time is coming, and he took the ark out of the base of Mikdash and hid it in those hidden balls, and it's still there. I mean, they made the movie looking for the ark.
Indiana Jones. Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
I don't know what the people who are looking for the ark. It's a real idea. But now, what does that mean spiritually? It's hidden. The potential isn't destroyed, but it's also not visible. If it was visible, the world would be different. If it was destroyed, the world would be very different. No, it's here, but it's hidden. Or its potential is always accessible, but you got to dig into yourself to find your own hidden ark. Okay. You want to continue? You want to summarize outside? No, finish it up.
In Kabbalah, as quoted in the Torah, it is explained that the spies function in the realm of thoughts and did not desire to descend to the realm of speech. According to another understanding, they willing to descend to the realm of speech, but not to the realm of action.
There's three faculties we have to express ourselves: thought, speech, and action. So spies were in the desert, they're on the level of thought, or they're on the level, and they didn't want to go to speech, or they didn't want to accept speech, they wanted to go to action. What's the difference?
The difference between thought and speech is that thought is self-contained, existing only within the person himself. Conversely, a person speaks when he wants to affect another person. This analogy helps us understand the difference between the Jews' divine service in the desert and their divine service in Eretz Yisrael, and the practical lesson to be learned from it. The transition from the divine service of the desert to the divine service in Eretz Yisrael is not confined to spending its efforts, but beyond Torah study by carrying out the mitzvos as they are clothed in material entities. And furthermore, involving oneself in material entities in this spirit of the dictate to know him in all the ways, as explained above. Such endeavors may still be entirely self-contained. Although they do not involve material existence, they do relate to a person's individual divine service alone. And in the final analysis, when a Jew's divine service is self-contained, he is still in the desert. He remains in the realm of thought, absorbed in himself without communicating to others.
You take a person who's actually doing it all, studying Torah. He's even gotten to the point where he's living in the world and doing mitzvos and conducting his business with mitzvos and seeing godliness. That he's all doing it by himself. Doesn't talk to anybody else. The Jew's novel achievement.
The Jew's novel achievement upon entering Eretz Yisrael involved engaging with others, devoting himself to them, and making them into Torah Jews who study the Torah and obey its commandments. Now, the Yitzhahar can argue if one devotes himself to another Jew and endeavors to influence him, it will engender feelings of pride. He would surely feel on the higher level on his mother. And these feelings will be criminally forced if the other person responds with thanks, honor, and praise. Since one does not desire to become self-concerned, a yesh in Hasidic parlance, or become conceited, which would be the source of all types of evil, he will think that it's preferable to refrain from such involvement and remain self-contained.
I'll sit by myself, learn Torah. If I teach somebody else, I'll feel proud. Especially if they praise me, I'll definitely feel proud. So I just don't want to do that. I want to stay in my own little holy world. The rebuttal.
The rebuttal to this argument is that this is the approach of the spies, who feared that the land consumes its inhabitants. The truth is that if God desires us, that is, when one acts in order to fulfill God's desire, not only will this not cause a descent, but on the contrary, one's path will lead upward. As Caleb said, it will lead to a twofold descent. The Yitzhahar may still argue, it is true that one must involve himself with another person, but it is sufficient to work with a person on one's own level. There is no need for one to descend to work to save a lowly individual whose level is far removed from one's own. Involvement with such individuals may lead to one being dragged down. This is the relevance of the story of the spies. Even speech is not enough. Action is necessary. The difference between speech and action is that speech relates to equals or near equals, to human beings who hear and understand what is being said. Action, by contrast, can affect even inanimate. The lesson from the stories of the spies, that action is necessary, teaches that we must be involved even with a person who, relative to us, is on so low a spiritual level that he is considered like an inanimate entity. It is specifically through such endeavors that we reach the ultimate ascent, while on our lives and afford the true inheritance, the bond with God's very essence.
Sum it up, the Rebbe is telling us that we've got to go into the world, got to live in. And then, furthermore, once we're in the world, we can't just say, okay, so I've actually done it all. I'm in the spiritual reality in the world. No. Extend yourself to another Jew, speak to another person, even someone who's not at all on your level, share it with them. If you have an understanding of spirituality, how spirituality can actually touch your material existence, so share it with somebody else. Let them also see. So the sichah is sort of, like we said before, what was the issue of the spies? We'd love to stay in the spiritual, it's all perfect here. Comes what happens? We said, no. The purpose is not to be the spiritual as its own lofty plane. The idea is to fuse the spiritual and material. How can we do that? Because we're not doing it on our own, we're agents of God. He wants us to do it, he gives us the power, he invests himself in us and makes that possible. And then we can achieve this fusion of the spiritual and the material, and you can also go out and share it with somebody else. Everybody else should also understand this truth.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem. I just want to say that today is a very special day. Like getting close. Shabbos is Chufkas Sibum, the day which the Rebbe came to America. And when you meet a sikh like this, yeah, in Europe, well, the shtetl, that's one thing. The idea of bringing Chassidus to America, in a land which is so, we deal with material consciousness. That's America's about, whatever beautifully said, God we trust is on the dollar. In other words, what's the idea? That the ultimate Americans live for the dollar. But on the dollar is in God we trust. So I think that's, it's like so point that we learn this sichah, on the day where this Rebbe is coming to America is being commemorated.